Welcome to the What's Good podcast. I'm Allison Gallagher, Executive Director of Volunteer East Tennessee, and with me is my esteemed co-host, Matt Ryerson, CEO and President of the United Way of Greater Knoxville.
Esteemed, I like it.
Yeah.
That's new. Thank you. It's great to be here, another one.
I know. I can't believe they are having us back.
That's right. We haven't been canceled, so that's good.
And we have a great guest, a friend of yours.
Yes.
A good human. We like to have those on the show. Welcome, Rodney Prunty. Nice to have you. Rodney is the president and CEO of United Way of Central New Mexico. And just to make you super uncomfortable, we're going to go through your bio a little bit, okay? Because this is always the most awkward part of anything. You've worked in the United Way network for 14 years. Previously president of the United Way of Racine County, Wisconsin, vice president, resource development manager of the United Way of Rock River Valley, Rockford, Illinois, president of the United Way of Wisconsin board, bachelor's degree in human services and master's in organizational leadership from Judson University. Born in St. Louis, grew up in Rockford, Illinois, rabid LA Rams fan.
Oh, geez.
Married to Melanie, father to 4 beautiful children. You might have a few pets running around. Welcome, Rodney.
Well, thank you so much. That was a nice sum up of the bio, and just glad to be here and see Matt again and talk with you all.
Well, we'll dive right in.
Before you go too far, I do want to say you mentioned he's an old friend of mine, and I want to highlight the word old. He's a friend of mine who is old. So, yeah, no, we go way back, and it's great to see you, Rodney.
So Matt, when he took this role at the United Way of Greater Knoxville, he just drove down the interstate a couple miles. He didn't really go that far. But your gig took you from Racine, Wisconsin to Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is approximately 1,396 miles. I put it into Google Maps last night. That's a major move and a completely different community. Mm-hmm. Tell us about how you landed in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Well, as a child, I always had an affinity for, the western part of the country. And I remember growing up in Rockford and, enduring those cold winters and yearning for, warmer, sunnier pastures. And so we went on a family vacation in 2016 and we did a road trip. We wanted to do it old school style. So we drove across the country, made certain stops. The ultimate destination was San Diego. And so, again, made multiple stops. And then on the way back to Wisconsin, Albuquerque was one of our stops. And we had never been there before. And just driving in off 40 and then seeing the cityscape, the way the city sits within the mountains, and it just took our breath away. And, we spent the day and evening there and really enjoyed our time. And, on the way back, my wife and I were just talking and just said, of all the places that we've been, Albuquerque would be a great place to live. And we were like, yeah, and, just kind of stored it away. And then when the opportunity arose to lead this United Way, a few years later, I put in a call to my colleague who was retiring, Ed Rivera, and said, hey, what do you think? About me tossing my hat in the ring. He said, hey, go ahead and go for it. And I did. And I was fortunate enough to be selected to lead this awesome United Way.
That's awesome. How's it going so far in Albuquerque?
It's going very well, very well. The community has been very welcoming. Certainly pre-pandemic, I was, meeting with a number of different folks, community stakeholders, board members, things like that. That's been slowed down, but the work has continued. We have a collaboration here that is essentially non-traditional with the Albuquerque Community Foundation. So we teamed up to stand up an emergency action fund when COVID first hit. And then later on, probably about 4 or 5 months later, we partnered to form this initiative called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion United, which is a multifaceted effort to create equitable and just solutions in Albuquerque. So great partnerships there, a tremendously generous community. Our campaign has continued to strengthen over the years, and been very fortunate in terms of the support we get from the community and what we're able to get.
In fact, I got to bring up, you were the generous. Yeah, you were the recipient of one of the Mackenzie Scott generous gifts that she gave to a number of United Ways around the country. Can you just comment on that? How'd you find out, and what was that experience like?
It was really interesting. So I got this kind of innocuous email, and I opened it, and it was like, there's a donor who's interested in supporting your organization. Do you have time for a call? And I was very suspicious, and I thought, I don't know, is this a scam or what? But then I thought, well, if I give them my number, I don't think they can do anything, to compromise anything. So I gave my phone number and got on the call. And, after talking with this person and her financial advisor, telling me that Mackenzie Scott wanted to give us a donation, and I was really kind of floored by that. But I didn't know who Mackenzie Scott was by name. I didn't. And so then I did some research, like you, Allison, and was able to find out that she had already engaged in a pretty significant round of philanthropy earlier with other organizations. And so I felt like, okay, well, it's legit, but still a little bit concerned about it. But long story short, it did work out. And the organization, the board, the staff, everyone was floored by it. The community is, right now, we're very close to, moving forward with how we're going to disperse those funds. We have multi-year plans on how we're going to spend those funds, some in the immediate near term to support basic needs in COVID, and then some long-term aspirations and some investments too we'll be making. So yes, Matt, it has definitely been generous. But when I saw that you had also received it, I knew I was in good company. We were texting back and forth. You got it? Yeah, I got it. You got it? You got it? Yeah. So
well, and it's funny. My first text to him was I was a little anxious because I didn't know if he got it. So I was kind of like, hey, did you hear about? And he's like, yeah, we got it. And I was like, good. So do we. Yes. I just didn't want to celebrate. But, to your credit, Rodney, I know a lot of that was your leadership in Albuquerque. So congratulations on that. Seriously, that's a big deal.
Anything you can share with us as your plans with the funds?
Yes, we have a very detailed plan. And again, we basically sectioned off those funds in about 6 or 7 different buckets and allocated certain amounts of funds to those buckets. And then, I have a work team of board and staff evenly balanced to really flesh out the details around that. And again, we're just about done with the details around how we're going to spend out those buckets, because some buckets we're spending out as long as 7 years. Mm-hmm. Other buckets are 3 years. Some are 5. It depends on the impact that we're really intending to make with those buckets. And then we'll make the recommendations of the work group to the board in our meeting in April. And then off we go to get the funds out into the community.
What a game changer of a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, what a huge investment in important work. I think as nonprofit professionals, we don't often get gifts like that, or this might be like your once in a career moment for a $10 million gift. So exciting to see what comes with that investment. You mentioned your DEI work in Albuquerque, and I know that you're not a stranger to it. You did work around this in Racine, and certainly pre-2020. And I would like to hear more about that and how that came to be. I think it started in 2015. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I'd love to know how those conversations started and where they landed, and then what you brought with you to Albuquerque.
Yeah, so it actually starts, kind of the nucleus of the format of how we engaged with DEI started when I was still vice president in Rockford, Illinois. So when I got promoted to that position, one of the charges I got from the CEO was he wanted us to be much more relevant in the community and to really move away from kind of being the fundraiser and the distributor of funds and more of an impact organization. And so actually started a partnership with a faith-based organization to create a neighborhood resource center. But at that time, we didn't necessarily have any models to really look at. Fortunately, shortly after that, United Way Worldwide created a partnership with Rich Harwood, who runs the Harwood Institute out of Bethesda, Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
And I was really taken with his model. And so we used that model to hold community conversations with residents in this neighborhood where this church was located to create a neighborhood resource center. And so based on the feedback from the community, a set of services were installed and implemented there based on really the hopes, the aspirations, and the concerns of the neighborhood residents. So I took that experience with me to Racine and actually leveraged community conversations as one of 4 methods that I used to create a comprehensive strategic plan, because I wanted to do the data analysis, SWOT analysis, community engagement, and doing a donor, non-donor survey. So what we heard from the community and the response we got was so positive that I said, we're just going to make this part of what we do. So we built in a structure in the organization that was cross-functional, where every year we would hold community conversations, and they would be organic. And whatever would bubble up to the surface, we would have an event at the end of the conversation cycle, which was typically in the summer. And then we'd share with the community the high-level themes of what we heard for leaders of all kinds to take action on that. So after Brian challenged us in this way, we really sprang into action very quickly, because as a staff, we had the infrastructure and the experience to really jump into these community conversations essentially immediately. And so, certainly this was a little different because it was topic focused and not organic. So it was all about race, equity, and inclusion. And that was the focus of the questions. And we really wanted to learn from people what their concerns were, the barriers, the hopes, and some solutions. And so we held community conversations with a few hundred people over the course of 2 years to really understand what their concerns and their hopes were. And in this instance, we decided that we were going to take some discrete action as a united way, and then also still challenge the community. So we wanted to be focused on, certainly addressing these issues. And so at the end of 2 years, we held a big event. Hundreds of people showed up. We shared with the community what we heard and the actions that United Way was going to take to address some of these issues. Namely, there were three discrete solutions that were really determined. One was a focus on creating equitable workplaces. So the network of businesses led by United Way would really convene around getting more intentional about making sure that they were adhering to equitable practices. Another one was an equity pledge taken by local folks to really dedicate themselves to individually doing what they could to address some of these inequitable systems and practices. And then we did one thing that we kept hearing over and over was they wanted to do a multicultural event that celebrated all cultures. And so we did a kickoff of that. It was called One Racine, and it was it was in a big convention center there, and it had different stations of different cultures and nationalities where they would showcase aspects of their culture, the performances and things like that. About 1,000 people showed up to that. So that was a great way to bring the community together. And so that was really kind of the foundation of my experience in that work. And then I brought it to Albuquerque after the George Floyd murder. And that's how the Albuquerque Community Foundation and our United Way, we came together and said, what can we do? And so we went and had community conversations once again. This time we started with Black and Indigenous people of color or BIPOC leaders in nonprofit and philanthropy to understand the barriers that they were experiencing to providing effective, equitable, and just service delivery to their clients. And so we had conversations with about 50 of those leaders. And we did kind of a mid-year report, and we have that report, and we've distributed it to our partners in terms of understanding some of the themes that were lifted up. One of the big themes that came out of that was creating leadership pathways for BIPOC staff in nonprofit and philanthropy, because there's such a lack of representation of BIPOC leaders in leadership roles in these organizations. So that's something that we're already started to work on as a partnership, this BIPOC leadership network that we're excited to potentially be bringing on some big funders to help support this effort and to create intentional leadership pathways, professional development for BIPOC leaders in philanthropy and nonprofit. And then we're also funding BIPOC-led projects, and we've made the process very simple. So, typically at United Way, you got to go through like a Rube Goldberg style endeavor.
So true.
And so we wanted to simplify the process. So I got an email from a group that wanted to do board training for people of color. And it's actually the name of the project is Building Better Boards with People of Color. And so we got on a Zoom call, the CEO from Albuquerque Community Foundation and myself. They did the pitch, did the PowerPoint, showed us a program plan. We said, okay, good. We'll fund it. And it was a small grant. We're funding them for 3 years. And the idea is a cohort of BIPOC leaders or staff, they don't even have to be leaders, that get trained in board governance from a cultural and structural perspective. And then they also get placed at the end of the training. So it's just not the training, they get placed in either nonprofit or for-profit organizations. We funded them for 3 years. They're gonna run through about 5 cohorts. And we're really excited about that partnership. And we just got off a call last week with the Asian Business Collaborative here in Albuquerque to potentially fund a project that they are interested in to help advance the work of the Asian community here in Albuquerque. So that's going to be our approach as we look at funding BIPOC-led organizations or BIPOC or organizations to serve the BIPOC population. We want to take kind of the stuff out of the way to really make it more of a quick through line to the funding so that they can execute on getting the work done. So that's going to be our model. We're refining that over time in terms of making sure that we get funds out in the most effective way.
That's amazing, Rodney. I love this process. And this is a theme that we've heard in a couple of our guest conversations is the process of listening. Maybe you could talk to how important it is when we're talking about any community we serve. And in this particular case, people of color, actually taking the time. And Racine, you talked about 2 years you took in that kind of that community conversation process. In Albuquerque, it's been expedited, but maybe you could talk to how important that is and how that maybe introduce you ideas you might not otherwise thought of.
Oh, no, I think the last thing you said is very true, and that's the value in it. And I think the larger value is, in a lot of ways, it's returned United Way to its roots. I mean, back in 1887 in Denver, Colorado, when it all started, it was really grassroots, community style. Let's get folks together to really understand what our community's problems are. And we still do that. But I think over time, we've kind of drifted into the grass tops. So we have all the, usual suspects at the table making decisions. And there's a saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so we wanted to make sure that we wanted to engage the community at the grassroots level. Folks who are closest to the challenges every day know probably best or could weigh in pretty significantly on how to address those issues. And so, when we started this process in Racine with the community conversations around, just in general for the strategic planning process, I always tell this story. There was a gentleman, African-American man, and I was leading this conversation of African-American leaders. It was about 15, 16 of us in the room. So this gentleman comes in and he's got this folder and he's got all kinds of paper stuffed in it. He sits down and he says, yeah, I can't wait to get this conversation started. I'm gonna tell United Way about itself, right? He was gonna give us a piece of his mind, but he never got there. He engaged in the conversation. He kind of moved it to the side as we continue to engage in these very meaningful conversations. And so at the end of it, when we did our event at the end of the year, at the end of the cycle, he brought his wife and he personally introduced her to me and said, this is Rodney Prunty, he's the CEO. I think United Way's back, is what he said.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think that is just indicative of the experience that I certainly saw in Racine and that I'm seeing here is that a lot of times people just want to be heard, but they want to make sure, and rightfully so, that it isn't, here comes United Way into the community to grab some information and to leave. What we did and what we will continue to do here is we want to close the loop and we want to keep the doors open for continued engagement because it's so important to make sure that we are working intentionally to kind of co-create some solutions in community with folks who are, again, closest to the pain, they like to say. So that is a standpoint and a philosophy that I'm very, very passionate about and will continue to do with my work at United Way, is always making sure that the community has a voice. Now, I will tell you, there's always going to be a challenge because it's not always sunshine unicorns. I mean, there's going to be doubters. There'll be people that say, hey, United Way, why are you doing this? You don't typically do this. You're not a grassroots organization. And I always just say, number one, you got to prove yourself, step up to the challenge. Don't be discouraged, prove yourself and go with who will go with you. There will be groups that might not want to engage because of the historical perceptions around United Way being kind of this ivory tower nonprofit that doesn't care about the little people, if you will. But, sticking with it and making sure that, you follow through on your promises and that folks can actually see that they're being heard by action being taken is so important.
Hey, I love it. And you're kind of leading into my next question. You're partially answering it is, as United Ways around the country or any nonprofit that really wants to get into this arena or is serving in this arena, but is thinking, hey, these community conversations are really key. You talked about patience and commitment, show them who you are, all of that. But as they step into that arena, do you have any guidance or counsel for organizations that are considering this? Because obviously with 2020 and here locally, we talk about our desire to make that a movement, not a moment, that this is an ongoing process. But with that movement are all sorts of very difficult conversations, and simultaneously a lot of opportunity for misstep, right? To step on your own feet and really trip and fall on some of this. Any advice or counsel you'd give for anybody that's looking to get into this work in the diversity, equity, and inclusion arena?
I would say expect missteps to occur. Do your best to mitigate it, but expect that to occur and don't beat yourself up over it if it happens. If you are an organization that is historically not known to do work in this space, I mean, that's just going to come with the territory. But I would say when it comes to community conversations and really the best and most effective implementation of those, start with people who love you. So I would say your board. So even in Racine, when we started the community conversations on race, equity, and inclusion, we started with our board. It was kind of a way for them to kind of have that experience. And they were so taken by the power of the experience that they were like green lighting it, instantly, like we got to do this, right? But it also gave the team an opportunity to build this muscle around this kind of conversation. Again, in Racine, they had the experience of implementing conversations organically, but not around a topic like this, right? Which a lot of people want to kind of step away from. We did the same thing in Albuquerque. So before we held the community conversations with the BIPOC leaders and nonprofit, we started with our board. So we had the Albuquerque Community Foundation board and the United Way board participate in the first round of conversations to kind of go through it. And even as a method of holding these conversations with our BIPOC nonprofit partners and leaders in the community, it was still another way for us to continue to exercise that muscle, because the next phase for us is that we will go deeper into community, to grassroots. But it's not something that you got to make sure that you kind of exercise the muscle and the experience before you go directly into community around something like this, because you just want to make sure that you have some sense of kind of cadence and flow. And again, to expect there to be naysayers, expect there to be people who might not want to engage with you. And again, don't take it personally, don't lose faith. Just again, this is all about, starting in this work is all about creating a coalition of the willing folks who want to go with you. And once you start going and people start to see action, then the others will come.
Did you use any particular curriculum or script in those community conversations? Is that something you developed, or was it completely organic where it was wide open and people could just kind of jump in with anything?
So we use kind of a hybrid of, hardwood questions, which talk about aspiration for a community. What kind of community do you want? What barriers do you see? Who do you trust to take action on these issues? And some questions that United Way Worldwide had provided around this once, when Brian put the call out, 5 years ago. So we kind of mixed it. And even in Racine, they're still doing it. And they've constantly refined those questions and polished them to a point to really get at the information they want. So I'm so proud of that team, because although I don't lead that team anymore, they are still continuing very passionately in the space. So it was embedded in the organization psyche. So it's there, and they'll continue to be a force in Racine in this work.
And then my last question on this, and I know Allison has a few other questions, but I just get energized by this. The outcomes or the ongoing impact in Racine, right? So you see your team after they ran you out, or after you left that art community. After you left that community, they're obviously I couldn't help myself. As they continue to do this work, I expect it's because they're seeing impacts in the community, and that the community is changing at some level. Is that what you're seeing? And do you see any early impact in Albuquerque?
So I think to the Racine part of the question, yes. In fact, I stay in contact with the CEO there on a regular basis. And she informed me recently that the largest supporter there has really been pushing hard for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it started, shortly after I left, and some of the actions that were taken began to take root in the community. And so they're all about it. And that's a big deal in Racine because the largest supporter there is very, very active in the community and well respected. Here in Albuquerque, I am seeing certainly signs from the community that this is something that is long overdue. I had a conversation with the newest director of Kellogg. So there's a Kellogg Foundation here in New Mexico. And so we had a great conversation about partnership opportunities. But one of the things that she mentioned to me was, I think it's great that you and the Community Foundation are partnering. This is long overdue and needed in our community. Even though Albuquerque doesn't, strike the top of the list in people's minds when it comes to these issues because of the diversity of the state and the community, there are issues that we do need to address when it comes to inequities. And so it's just different. There's multiple layers on top of it. When we're seeing it was primarily the African-American community. Here you have the Native American community with the worst outcomes, followed by African Americans and Hispanics, and the Asian community, while statistically is, they always rank kind of at the top, they have their challenges as well. There's been a lot of issues certainly around Asian Americans, and you probably have seen it in the news with some of the hate crimes, some of those things that are happening. And so it is starting to take root, and I was really energized after my conversation with the Kellogg staff, because it was like, we can really partner and do really, really big things here. So I think the environment is ripe for this work to accelerate here as well.
It's awesome.
It's awesome. As a nonprofit leader, how do you get your team rallied around this when you know it's going to be really hard work, it's going to be valuable, it's going to be rewarding, and you're talking about 2 to 3 years? And we all know that turnover can be high in the nonprofit world. And it's really important to have consistency and to have people that are invested on your team. How do you build that rapport? How do you bring them along with you? How do those conversations go?
Yeah, that's a great question, quite frankly. And it's a process. And I think first it starts with the why. Like, why, let's ground this in the why. Why are we doing this? Of course, we know that there are issues in our country when it comes to systemic racism and what happened with George Floyd. Folks were really affected by that. But why are we doing it here in Albuquerque? Grounded in the understanding that this is much more than just a social justice imperative or a moral imperative. That's the big part of it, right? But it's also a business imperative. We have left trillions of dollars on the table because of our systems. And those trillions of dollars that we will never see would have benefited everyone, not one race, not two, all of us. So there's multiple reasons why this work is important. So it's really grounding in the why and then leading from there. And to be honest and authentic with them. Don't certainly sing Pollyanna in the sky and say, we're going to bring people together and it's going to be great. No, be authentic. This is going to be a challenge. It's going to be tough. Everybody's not going to embrace us. In fact, as we started this process with the Albuquerque Community Foundation and doing these community conversations, there was some consternation from some folks around, but what if we engage them and they say things about us that are bad? And I said, well, that's good, because that gives us a sense of, where we stand in the community, and it gives us a bar and kind of a goal and a place to really reach for to get past that point, and to expect that. So I think a lot of it is just grounded in understanding the why, be authentic, and be honest that this is going to be it's a marathon, not a sprint. And for them to see themselves in the work, because, once again, here, it's a cross-functional activity. But so, for example, we have an initiative known as Mission Graduate that focuses on a big goal. You already know, don't you?
You know it.
You'll probably tell me what it's all about. In any event, the staff there see this work is vital to them, because if there's inequity in the school systems, we're never going to be able to move the needle in the way that we want, right? And so the same thing for some of our other community impact initiatives. When it comes to the fundraising side of the equation, that's when you talk about the business case. Like, our corporate partners need to understand why this is so important. And so folks can see themselves in the work too. They can do that. If you can get them to see that, I think you'll also see some success there too. But it's a process. It took, I think in Racine, we had the benefit of starting organically for strategic planning purposes, and then just building it into just what we did. So the staff became accustomed to this as just a practice. And so after about 2 or 3 years, it was like, we just do this. And then when it was about race, equity, and inclusion, it was like, oh, okay, so we're just going to do this on race, equity, and inclusion. Now, there was still some consternation around it, but I would say in that experience, you would expect there to be some pretty fiery exchanges, and never saw not one time. And some groups were mixed, some groups were not, but we never saw that. And I intentionally made sure that we had the implementation team, the core team, if you will, comprised of people of color and white people as well. You know, to me, it's a big deal. I think, you know, white people need to be involved in this. Like, this is not a person of color thing. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
Right.
You need to have more representation in that space. And so that to me also helps move things along as well.
How critical are collaborations in this work? Because the United Way is, you know, usually they're a big game in town, no matter what town it is, compared to other nonprofits. But it sounds like a lot of your successes came from collaborating.
Mm-hmm. It's critical. I mean, again, going back to Racine, the core team was comprised of an executive director who was a partner running literacy programs, and another person of color that worked for a business-oriented organization in Racine. Here, of course, we have the Albuquerque Community Foundation as a collaborative partner. We're going to be looking to add on a few more as we go into this BIPOC leadership network. But I've always believed, I mean, you know, yes, United Way is you know, in most communities has a strong reputation, big game in town, as you said. But think about what's inherent in our name. It's United, right? That means that we can't do it on our own. So the only way that we can really do it is to make sure that we leverage partnerships and relationships and capacities and diversity of thought to really get the best possible solutions to bear for our communities. And so to me, it's almost like it's built into the process. Instead of saying, as a United Way, we're just going to go, it's more like, who else do we need to be having at the table to go through this process? So collaborations are critical.
One last question on this. And I
knew Matt had questions.
Just one more. Did you get pushback, or was there resistance to the time commitment, right? Because I mean, I think the world would love to flick a switch on some of these issues. And I think that seems to be one of the problems. In fact, we were talking about this last time we were together. And one reason I think Allison and I really got excited about the idea of a podcast is it allows for this nuanced conversation. It's not a tweet, it's not a Facebook post, but rather it's 45 minutes digging down deep on an issue and having that deep kind of conversation. And when you start talking about really making change, 2 and 3 years is not inappropriate. In fact, that's really probably how it should and has to happen. Did you have a problem selling that, or was that kind of, you didn't really talk about that, or was there an expectation, hey guys, we're in this for the long haul?
Yeah, I can answer that in a couple of ways. You know, going back to Racine, you know, and the fact that those conversations were held over 2 years, we did the 1-year updates the way that we typically did. So they didn't have to wait 2 years to get all of the information. So we did year 1 conversations. And what we found is that we needed to have more critical mass of representation, because we wanted to make sure that we were spot on with our solutions and what was recommended from the community. And so at that event, we shared the themes of year 1 conversations and said, we're going to have another year of conversations because we want to make sure that we create a critical mass of feedback from the community. And that went over well, because they were like, okay, so we're going to continue to go through this process. And then again, year 2, had the conversations, made the recommendations, and then off we went for implementation. So they saw those things happen in action. Here in Albuquerque, it is certainly clear that, you know, we're in this for the long haul, and I have made no bones about the fact that that's what our level of commitment here is. But what we've been able to do to help address some of those issues around expediency and implementing some of these things is the DEI United initiative kind of gives us all of that. So we have community conversations on one track. We know that that's a process-oriented engagement, but very important, because we want to hear from people again, from all walks of life, grassroots, what are your hopes, their concerns, your aspirations for the community. So there's that one track. We do the reports, we stay connected and engaged that way. The other track is the funding track. So that is really designed to be executed with speed. So we get, organizations that are interested in projects that help support the BIPOC community. We don't create this 4 or 5 month process for application, review, evaluation, and then whether or not you get the money. It's very quick. Again, that building better boards with people of color, that was pitched to us, and within 30 days, they were holding their first engagement.
That's awesome.
So that track, the funding track, is really designed to be executed with speed. And then, of course, we have the BIPOC Leadership Network, which will also be much more real-time focused and creating solutions to build leadership pathways for BIPOC staff and philanthropy and nonprofit. So you kind of have, with those 3 tracks, everything that you want for kind of a comprehensive approach to addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I have one last question, Allison. I'm going to shift gears and move on to an important topic to Rodney's heart. And I just want to ask, how do you keep your spirits up and your energy up being a fan of an underperforming and consistently bottom of the barrel team like the Los Angeles Rams? I mean, is that hard from
It's actually quite easy, Matt, because we made the change that we needed to make at quarterback, and we're going to win the Super Bowl in our home stadium. That's going to happen. You heard me say it here first.
Okay.
Wow.
Los Angeles, Super Bowl champs. We're going to, the Buccaneers kind of laid down that model, and we're going to follow it.
They did. And as a lifelong Cleveland Browns fan, I joke because I have no space to.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I would have told you to nix that question.
Browns and the Titans.
You can have pride, Matt. They beat the Steelers.
Yeah. That was big. That was big.
Yeah.
Well, to bring us back, we like to ask our guests, this is the What's Good podcast. And so we're going to ask you, Rodney, what's good? What's good in your community? What's good in your organization, our world? Just share something with us that's good.
I think what's good in our community is, a growing sense of coming together. I think there's a confluence of activities that are happening in Albuquerque that bode well for the future in terms of businesses. Facebook is expanding. We have a Facebook kind of south of us. They have supported some of our Mission Graduate efforts. Other businesses are expanding and coming to Albuquerque. There is a sense of collaboration with our community. What's good at United Way is another collaboration that I'm really proud of is, we're a very small state when it comes to representation of United Ways. There's only 8 United Ways in New Mexico, but we are collaborating on a big project to align our 211 efforts. I'm really excited about. We haven't done this before, new territory, but that could be big for the state. I think what's good, did you say with me too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Personally, feeling good. The sun is shining. Spring is here. I'm going to start riding my bike again. I'm looking forward to that.
Good. Rodney, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the incredible work you're doing in Albuquerque. It's been a pleasure. And if any of our listeners would like to learn more about the good things Rodney and his team in Albuquerque are doing, go to uwcnm.org. Thanks, Rodney.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Good to see you again, Matt. Nice to meet you, Allison.
Likewise.
Thanks, Rodney.
Thanks for listening to the What's Good podcast, presented to you by the United Way of Greater Knoxville. You can find more information about United Way of Greater Knoxville at
uwgk.org.
Thanks, Matt. And you can find out more about Volunteer East Tennessee at volunteeretn.org. Thanks for joining us.